Today I'm going to show you how to knit a pair of socks from beginning to end. These are the simple shorty socks and they're adorable and knit up so fast because they're knit in worsted weight yarn. In this video I'll show you the foundations of sock knitting, from turning a heel to picking up stitches in order to make a gusset to decreasing the toe and grafting it closed with Kitchener stitch. So consider this a quick and dirty crash course on sock knitting. This video includes timestamps in the description so you can easily navigate this tutorial. I've also got helpful links there as well. So grab the free pattern at the link in the description and follow along. If you'd like to support this channel, then please consider purchasing a beautiful PDF file of this pattern. It includes 6 sizes from baby to adult large and also includes a bonus pattern and video for customizing your shorty socks with stripes, a different colored heel, and tips for making those stripes seamless in the rib and jogless during color changes. Link in the description. Skills you'll need. To knit these socks successfully, you should be comfortable with the long tail cast on, the knit stitch, purl stitch, knitting in the round on double pointed needles, and have an adventurous attitude to new techniques. If you want to brush up on these techniques, I've linked tutorials for them in the description. Materials. 1 ball of Paintbox Yarns Wool Mix Aran in color 828. I'll link a video on knitting gauge because gauge is important. You'll also need a set of 3.75mm double pointed needles, a set of 3.5mm double pointed needles, which is optional for the ribbing, a locking stitch marker, also optional, tapestry needle, scissors, and a measuring tape. To choose a size, measure around the ball of the foot that you're knitting for. If you're knitting a baby, toddler, or child size, then subtract ½ an inch from this number. If you're knitting for an adult, subtract 1 inch from the number. This is your unique sock measurement. This measurement should match closely with the finished foot circumference of the sock. I'm knitting this sock for my niece Anna, and her unique sock measurement is 6.8. The closest size is the adult small at 6.9, so that's the size I'll knit. Hey, Davina popping in to tell you about the paid partner of this video, BetterHelp. I started knitting when I was a teenager, and while it was really creative and fun, the reason why I've been knitting well into my 30s is because knitting has helped me immensely with my anxiety. I find the repetitive motion of knitting really relaxing and soothing. It takes me out of my head and back into my body. While knitting helped, it wasn't really enough, and eventually I went to see a therapist. And I actually brought my knitting with me to my first few sessions because it just helped me feel less nervous to do something with my hands. Therapy helped me a lot. It gave me the tools I need to manage my own fears and worries and redirect my energy into things that I could change instead of just like doom spiraling in my own head. And just talking to someone when things felt too much was a lifeline. That's why today I want to talk to you about BetterHelp. BetterHelp is a highly reviewed online therapy platform, which means that you can get connected to a therapist without even leaving the comfort of your own home. Just fill out a questionnaire and you'll be connected to a therapist in as little as a few days. Then it's up to you on how you want to connect with your therapist. You can do a video call, you can talk on the phone, you can message, you can even bring your knitting with you if it helps you feel more open and relaxed. So if you think you'd benefit from a therapy session, then give BetterHelp a try and get connected to a therapist. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/sheepandstitch to get 10% off your first month of therapy. Let's talk briefly about how to read a knitting pattern. The most important thing is understanding the size-related instructions. So for example, the pattern has instructions that say, pick up and knit 8, open bracket, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, closed bracket, stitches along the end of the heel flap. Now the number on the far left refers to the smallest size, and the number beside that refers to the next size up, and the one beside that refers to the size up after that. So in this example, you would knit 8 stitches for baby, 9 for toddler, 10 for child, 11 for adult small, 12 for adult medium, and 13 for adult large. So if you're knitting the smallest size, the baby size, you'd only focus on the first number. That's all you're concerned about. You go through the whole pattern. Anytime you see a number followed by an open bracket, you'd only follow the first number because that refers to the baby size. All the other numbers are irrelevant. If you're like me and you're knitting an adult small, you'd follow the third number number within the brackets. So to keep organized, I recommend going through the entire pattern and highlighting the number that refers to your size. Now I'm going to use what's called the stretchy cast on, and I'm going to link that tutorial video for you here. This cast on creates a really stretchy edge, which is really what we want when we're knitting the cuff of a sock. You want that cuff to be really stretchy so that your foot can just get into that sock really easily. So if you don't want to do that, you can do a long tail cast on. It's totally fine. I prefer the stretchy cast on for maximum stretchiness. So I've got my yarn here and I am knitting the size adult small. So for that size, I'm going to be casting on 40 stitches. If you're knitting another size, then you'd cast on 28 for baby, 32 for toddler, 36 for child, 44 for adult medium, or 48 for adult large. We would start the same way that we do with a long tail cast on, with our left hand holding the yarn kind of like a diamond shape, like almost like a slingshot. So just like this, and then I'm going to take my needle and just touch it to my thumb, go underneath both of these strands of yarn around my thumb. The needle is going to go into the thumb, the loop on my thumb, pick up that loop. That's right here. Then I'm going to turn my hand, pick out the loop around the back of my finger like this. And then now you can sort of see a strand of yarn peeking through here, right on this needle. And I'm literally just going to pick out that strand of yarn and pull down, and that is my first stretchy cast on. Okay, so I'm going to go through this really quickly because if you want to learn this cast on, you can watch the more detailed tutorial, which I've linked in the description. So here we go. I'm going to bring my needle down and I'm going to pick out the strand of yarn, just go into that loop around my thumb, turn my hand, go into the loop around the back of my finger, and then pick out that little loop there, pull down, okay? Hand in a diamond position, going underneath both of these strands of yarn, and I'm going to go into that loop on my thumb, turn my hand, go into the loop around the back finger, and now I can see that strand of yarn right here, and I'm going to pick that out. Okay, so that is the stretchy cast on. Now I'm going to cast on 40 stitches for my size. So now I've got 40 stitches on my needle, and now we're ready to divide the stitches onto another 2 needles so that we have 3 needles holding all of our stitches. So I've got 40 stitches, and let's see, 40 into 3 is, I'm just going to go with 13. I'm going to take off 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Great. And then I'm going to take my third needle. So I've got a video all about knitting with double pointed needles. If this is a new concept for you, I will link it in the description and up top on the upper right. 12, 14. Great. So this one's got 14. The last one's got 12, 13. Perfect. So I'm holding my 3 needles kind of like a triangle shape, and my working yarn is right here. It's the one that's attached to the ball of yarn. I'm going to take my naked needle, the needle without any stitches on it, and then I'm going to push into this first stitch on my left needle, push right into it. And then with my working yarn, I'm going to wrap it around that naked needle, just the tip of that naked needle. And then I'm just going to knit into it. And now, just by pulling on that working yarn, I have joined in the round. Perfect. So at this point, we are going to knit 2 by 2 rib, which means we're going to knit 2 stitches. Here we go, knit 2. We've got 2 stitches here, and then we're going to purl 2. So I'm going to bring my yarn up front and then purl the next 2 stitches. Okay, purl 1 and purl 2. Bring the yarn to the back, and now that is our whole sequence. Knit 2, purl 2. So I'm going to do that all over again. Knit 2 and bring the yarn up front, purl 2. And if you haven't gotten tired of me saying this yet, I do have a tutorial all about rib knitting, including 1x1 and 2x2 rib, and I will link that in the description and up top. So we'll just work 2x2 rib across the whole round. Now I'm near the end of the round. I'm gonna do 2 knits. And my last 2 stitches here will be 2 purl stitches. Here we go. Great. So I've just completed my first round of 2x2 rib. Now you'll notice this little yarn tail here. It marks the beginning and end of the round. This tail is the leftover from when we did our cast on. So in the pattern, I say to PM, which stands for place marker. Now you can place a marker in the stitches between these 2 needles to mark the beginning of the round, but I don't find it that necessary because this little yarn tail tells me where the beginning and end of the round is. It's right here. So I won't place a stitch marker, but you're welcome to do it if you want to. So let's continue knitting 2x2 rib in the round. For baby, toddler, and child sizes, it would be 1 inches, and for the larger sizes, it'll be 2 inches. So rib knitting is really simple. I'm just gonna knit the knits and purl the purls. These next 2 stitches are knits, so I'm gonna knit them. Great. The next 2 stitches are purl stitches. So I'll bring my yarn up front and purl into them. That's the great thing about knitting rib stitch. It's fairly mindless. You just knit the knits and purl the purls after you've established that first round of ribbing. So go ahead and knit either 1 inch or 2 inches of 2x2 rib. So I've knit 2 inches of ribbing, and now we can move on to knitting the heel. Our pattern says to switch to our larger double pointed needles. These are my 3.75 millimeter double pointed needles. They are my larger needles. So we're gonna switch over to them. If you're only working with 1 needle, then just ignore this step. Okay, so we're gonna knit 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, or 24 stitches. I'm knitting an adult small, so I'll knit 20 stitches with my larger needles. And here we go. I'll knit 20 stitches. I've knit 14. So I'll set down my smaller needle here and continue knitting another 6 stitches because I need 20 stitches and 14 plus 6 is 20. So I'm not going to use a new needle. Instead, I'll use the same needle to knit an additional 6 stitches. It's a little tight, but it's just 6 stitches, so I'll survive. So I've knit 20 stitches, which is what I need for my size. These stitches are the instep, which is this part of the sock. We're going to place these stitches that we just knit onto some scrap yarn. You can use a separate needle if you like. The idea is just to put these stitches on hold. We're not going to work them just yet. They're just going to hang out. So I've got some red yarn here and I've got it thread up onto a tapestry needle. And now I'm gonna slide these stitches that I've just knit onto the tapestry needle. Just drop them off one by one. Now I'll draw that scrap yarn through the stitches. Perfect. Now the stitches are held securely on the scrap yarn. With the instep stitches on the scrap yarn, let's turn our attention to the remaining stitches. These are my heel stitches, and I want to consolidate them onto my larger needles. Okay, so let's move on. The instructions say that these remaining stitches are the heel stitches. You will work them back and forth in rows over the next 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24 stitches. Now I'm knitting a adult small, so I'm going to knit to the next 20 stitches. You will have a different number of stitches depending on the size that you're knitting. So it goes row 1, right side. We're going to slip 1 and knit to the end. So I'm going to use my larger needle at this point. And I'm going to grab my working yarn and I'm going to slip that first stitch off the needle as if I were knitting. Okay, so I'm not going in like this. I'm going in as if I were going to knit the stitch, but instead of knitting it, I'm going to slip it off the needle. Great, so that's a slip 1. And then I'm just going to knit these stitches to the end of the row. So I've come to the end of this needle. This is my smaller needle. And I'm just going to set this aside and continue knitting across this needle. Essentially, we're consolidating all the active stitches onto one needle, the larger needle. So I'm going to just continue knitting. And here's my last stitch. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to set this needle aside. This would be my small needle. So now my stitches are on this one needle. This should be my larger needle, and the rest of the stitches are on the scrap yarn. And that is our row 1. We're just slipping one and then knitting to the end. Now row 2, we're going to turn our needle over. Turn our needle over, and we're going to slip one and then purl to the end. And then we would just go right back to the beginning. So essentially we're knitting back and forth. Now let's take a look at the instructions closely. It says work rows 1 to 2 a total of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 times, and that number refers to the size that you are knitting. So for me, I would knit row 1 and 2 9 times, and I've just made a chart for myself so I can keep track of how many times I've knit row 1 and how many times I've knit row 2. Now we just did a row 1, which was slip 1, knit to the end, so I'm just going to mark down 1. So I'm doing adult small, that's why I'm doing it 9 times. Okay, so let's just work the next row together. If this is confusing to you, don't be confused, I will show you the way. Okay, so I'm going to get out my other large needle because we're working with the large needles now. Okay, there is no more smaller needles. Their job was really just for the rib. Okay, row 2, wrong side, we're going to take our larger needle and we're going to slip one. Now I'm going to bring my needle underneath the yarn and slip it as if I were purling it, right? So I'm going to go in like this, not like this. Okay, we're going to slip it purl-wise. I'm going to slip it off. Great, and then we're just going to purl to the end. So the yarn is up front, and I'm going to purl. Just like that. So easy peasy. We're essentially working stockinette stitch back and forth on these heel stitches. So here's my last purl stitch. Great. So that is the end of row 2. And again, I'm just going to take out my little notebook here and just mark that I've just done row 2, okay? That's my first repeat of row 1 and row 2. And I'm gonna go right back to the beginning. We're gonna repeat rows 1 and 2. So I'm going to go back to row 1, slip off that first stitch as if to knit, and then knit to the end of the row. And then when I'm done this row here, I would go back to my little charty chart and just mark off that I finished it, right? Continue working rows 1 and 2 for the number of times that you need for your size. If you really don't like keeping track of rows using a little chart, I'll show you another way that you can keep track of how many repeats you've done. Just take a look at the selvage edge of your knitting. Go right to the edge of your knitting and just kind of uncurl the edge, and then you can see kind of like these big V shapes. So to count up how many rows you've done, you can just count up the selvage. So here I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that tells me that I've done 5 repeats of row 1 and row 2. And I've been keeping track using my little chart. According to my chart, I have knit 5 repeats. So just by counting up the selvage edge, I know how many repeats I've done. The only downside is that you may just knit more than you need. Then you would need to rip back a couple rows. I'm just kind of a freaked out person, so I like having my little charts to keep me organized. But counting up the selvage edge is definitely an option too. I'm on my last repeat of row 2. Beautiful. So I'm going to take out my little chart and fill up my last row 2 of my 9th repeat. So right now our knitting just looks sort of weird, right? We've got like the cuff of our sock, and then we've got this big long piece. So this is actually the heel of our sock, but now we need this fabric to turn, and we're going to do that by turning the heel. We're going to go row 1, right side, and I'm going to slip the first stitch. So I'm going to use my right needle, go into that first stitch as if to knit, and then just slip it right off the needle. There we go. That's our our slip 1. Now we're going to knit 6, 8, 10, 12, or 14 stitches depending on your size. I'm going to be knitting 12 because I'm doing the adult small. So I've done a slip 1, now I'm going to do a knit 12. So I'm going to go knit 1, 2, and 12. And I can always confirm how many stitches I've knit just by counting my stitches. So that was a slip 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Perfect. So I've just done slip 1, knit 12 stitches. Now I'm going to do an SSK. SSK is a decrease stitch, and it goes like this. I'm going to slip this next stitch as if to knit. So go into that stitch and slip it off the needle, go into the second stitch as if to knit, and just slip it off the needle. So that's the SS, the slip of our SSK. Now we're going to do the K part of the SSK, which is knit. So I'm going to use my left needle and go into these 2 stitches that I've just slipped. So I'm going to go into them from the left to the right, just like that. And I'm going to take my working yarn, wrap it around the right needle, and just pull a stitch out, drop it off the left needle. And that is an SSK. So those 2 stitches that we slipped have now become this 1 stitch. Let's move on. I'm going to do a knit 1. And now we're going to turn our work, which means literally we're turning our work over. And that kind of marks a new row. Now we're on to row 2, which is the wrong side. So we're going to slip 1 with the yarn in front. That's what WYIF stands for, with yarn in front. Our yarn happens to be in front, which is perfect. So we're going to slip this first stitch as if to purl. So here we go, right needle goes into the stitch as if to purl, the yarn is up front, and we're just going to slip that stitch off, okay? So that's a slip 1 with yarn in front. Now we are going to purl either 1, 3, 5, 7. I'm knitting an adult small, so I'm going to purl 7. So I've just slipped 1, now I'm going to purl 7. And 7, great. Now I'm going to purl 2 together, and this is another decrease stitch. So these next 2 stitches, I'm going to purl into them as if they were 1 using my right needle. I'm going to insert my right needle into these 2 stitches, push the needle through. With my yarn up front, I'm going to purl into these 2 purl stitches, draw out a stitch, drop those 2 stitches off the needle. Now those 2 stitches have become 1 stitch. So that is a purl decrease. Now I'm going to do a purl 1, and then we're going to turn our work around, literally turn it around. And now we're on to row 3, which is a right side row. Okay, we're going to slip 1 knitwise. So slip 1 as if to knit off the needle. And then we're going to knit to 1 stitch before the gap. So if we take a look at our stitches, you can see where the gap is. It's right here. So we're going to knit to 1 stitch before the gap, okay? So let's just knit across this row. And you can't miss the gap because it's really big, so we are going to mind the gap. Here it is. We are going to slip, slip, knit. I'm going to go into that stitch as if to knit, slip it off the needle. I'm going to go into this next stitch as if to knit, slip it off the needle. Then now we're going to do the K part of our SSK. I'm going to take my left needle, go into these 2 stitches I've just knit from the left to the right, and I'm going to use my working yarn to wrap around the right needle and pull a stitch through, drop those 2 stitches off, and that is our SSK. Those 2 slip stitches have now become this 1 stitch on my right needle. Now I'm going to knit 1 and then turn our work around. Okay, turn it around, and now we're on to row 4, which is our wrong side. So row 4, we're going to slip 1 with the yarn in front. Yarn is already in front, so we're going to slip 1 easily. Then we're going to purl to 1 stitch before the gap. And I can see that it's right here. So we're going to purl to here, okay? 1 stitch before the gap. There is our big old gap. We're 1 stitch before it. Now we're going to purl 2 together. I'm going to go into this stitch as if to purl, go into the second stitch as if to purl. Now I've got these 2 purl stitches on my right needle. I'm going to take my working yarn, which is up front, and purl these 2 stitches as if they were one. Drop it off the needle. That's our purl 2 together, and we've also closed the gap. Now I'm going to purl 1 and then turn my work around. So let's take a look at our instructions. It says work rows 3 to 4 a total of 2, 2, 2, 2 or 3, 3 times. I'm going to work that a total of 2 times. Now I'm going to take out my notebook. I'm going to draw this out. So that's row 3, row 4, and I'm going to do it 2 times. I've done this repeat once already, which I just showed you. So I'm going to just fill in those 2 spots. So now I only need to do rows 3 and 4 once more, and then I will have done the repeat 2 times in total. So if you are knitting a medium or a large size, add 3 and then do it another 2 times, okay? I hope that makes sense. So I need to do this once more. So I'm gonna go right back to row 3. There we go. We have completed our heel turn. So we were doing a steep vertical on the heel, and now we've made a sharp 90-degree turn. This is our heel turn. Beautiful, right? And we can do just a stitch count to see that we've done this right. For me, I should have 14 stitches. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 14. Perfect. So I have the number of stitches that I need for my size. So now let's knit across all the stitches, and that'll be the end of our heel turn chapter. So I've just knit across this row, and now our heel turn is complete. Now we're going to work the gusset of the sock, and that is where the sock kind of narrows down into the foot of the sock. We're going to start picking up stitches along this edge with this needle. So let's take a look at our instructions. It says pick up and knit 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 stitches along the edge of the heel flap with the same needle that is holding the heel stitches, needle 1. I'm going to start assigning numbers to the needles. Don't worry, this is just a way to keep organized. So we're going to call this needle 1. Okay, so with needle 1, I'm going to pick up 11 stitches along this edge. Earlier, I was talking about the selvage edge, right? As a way to count up how many rows that we've knit. I find that a really easy way to pick up stitches is just to go into these selvage edges. And you can see big old V's, right? Here's one, here, here, here. And I'm just going to pick up into these V shapes. So here we go. I'm going to go right into this one right here. So I'm going to grab my needle and go in to that selvage edge and then wrap my yarn around the needle and pull out, whoops, there we go, pull out a stitch. So that's 1 stitch that I have picked up and knitted. Now I need to do 10 more. So here's my selvage edge little V, so I'll go into another one. That's 2, whoops, there we go. Here's another one along the edge, so I'm going to go into that and wrap my yarn around, pull a stitch through. That's 3. And I'm going to just continue going into the V's along the edge. That's 4 and 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and there we go, there's 11. So that worked out perfectly for me. If you have knit up your selvage edge and you have 1 stitch less or 1 stitch more, you can always just go back and like undo a couple edges and skip 1 selvage stitch if you need to. It doesn't really matter exactly where you pick up your stitches. It's more that you just want it to be evenly distributed across this edge. For example, if I only had 10 stitches and I needed 11 stitches, I could just push my needle into the knitting over here, right? Like maybe just around here, stick my needle in, wrap my yarn around and pull out a stitch, right? There we go. That would also be fine. So use the selvage edge as kind of a guide, but it's not like you have to go into each of those selvage edges. All right, now we are going to get out our second double pointed needle, and I'm going to place the stitches from my scrap yarn onto this needle so that we can knit up these stitches. So I'm just going to pull up my yarn to reveal the stitches. Sometimes they get kind of lost and they slump into the knitting, so you have to pull the yarn up to expose the stitches. And I'm just literally pushing my needle into the stitches that are being held by that scrap yarn. I've picked up all my stitches and I should have 20, so let's count them up. 2 and 20. Perfect. So now that my stitches are securely on my needle, I can just remove this scrap yarn. Let's see if I can get it off in one go. Yes, there we go. Now my yarn's off the needle and we can knit up these stitches. Now we are back to knitting in the round with our double pointed needles. We've picked up stitches along the edge of one side of the sock. Now we are going to work the stitches that we picked up from our scrap yarn. I'm going to use a separate needle and just insert it into the stitches that I've just picked up, and with the working yarn, just knit into them, okay? So at the join, I'll just give it a nice little tug. Don't want a hole there. And I'm just going to knit across these stitches. And this is my last stitch right here. So now I've knit across the instep stitches, and now we're ready to do the same thing on the other side of the sock and pick up stitches along the selvage edge. I'm going to grab another needle and we're going to call this needle 3, and I'm going to once again pick up 11 stitches along this edge here. So you can see that we picked up stitches on this side, we knit across the instep, and now we're picking up stitches on the other edge of the sock. So needle 3, and I'm going to be picking up 11 stitches. You'll be picking up 8, 9, 10, 12, or 13 depending on your size. I'm starting from the instep instead of down from the heel like we did on the other side. So here I'm just going to stick my needle into part of the knitting that is close to the stitch up here because I don't want any holes at this juncture point. So I'm going to just stick my needle in. This looks like a pretty good place to pick up a stitch, and I'll bring my yarn around and just loop it around, pull out. Let's see, can I pull out a stitch here or is it too much going on? Yes, whoa, here we go. Pull out a stitch. So that's 1, and I'm gonna pick up 10 more because I need to pick up 11. So now I'm gonna use my selvage edge as kind of a guide. So here it is. So I've picked up 1 stitch. I'll give this a tug, and I'm gonna pick up 2, and here we go, 3, and here is 11. Let's count them up again. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. Perfect. So just make sure you've picked up the right number of stitches for your size. So you can just take a look at our knitting so far. It looks a little bit uneven, right? This first needle has a lot of stitches and this one has a little bit less. So what we need to do is transport some of these stitches over to this needle. Our instructions say with needle 3, knit 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 stitches from needle 1. I'm just going to use this needle to knit directly from this one. I'm not going to use another naked needle. So for me, I'm going to be knitting 7 stitches from needle 1. So let's go in here. I'm going to knit 1, 2, and 7. All right, great. So now when I look at my stitches, they look a lot more even, right? These stitches should be evenly distributed across these 2 needles. This one, nothing's changed here. Okay, so going back to our instructions, after we have knit the stitches from needle 1, we're going to do what's called PM, which is short for place marker. So I've got a little locking stitch marker here. I'm just going to unlock it. And right here, I'm going to insert the stitch marker, not on the stitches on the needle, because we need to knit these stitches, but just like right in the stitches below it, to indicate this is the beginning of the round. Lock it right up. Here we go. So now it's just sitting right here. So now let's do a stitch count to make sure we have the right number of stitches on each needle. So needle 3 and needle 1 should have 12, 14, 16, 18, 19, or 21 stitches. I need to have 18 stitches on each needle. So I'm just going to count them up real quick. 16 and 18. Perfect. So both my needle 3 and needle 1 have 18 stitches. Great. And my needle 2 should have 20 stitches for my size. So 18 and 20. Perfect. So the total number of stitches I should have is 56 stitches. Go ahead and make sure you've got the right number of stitches on needle 3, needle 2, and needle 1. And when you do, then we can move on to the next step, which is round 1, knit all of our stitches. So I'm going to take my naked needle and I'm going to knit one round even across all these 3 needles. So here is my last stitch of round 1. Beautiful. So I've just knit one round even across my 3 needles. So let's talk about round 2. Round 2 is really where we start talking about needle 1, 2, and 3. So again, needle 1 is this needle. Needle 2 is this one up here holding the insteps, and needle 3 is this guy right here. So I'm going to turn my knitting over so that we're on the right side. This is the beginning of our round. This would be our first needle. We always start on needle 1, and then this is our second needle, needle 2, and needle 3 is right here. So let's work this. Needle 1, we're going to knit to the last 3 stitches. So very simple, we're just going to knit across needle 1 till we get to the last 3 stitches. So let's do that together. Here I'm at the last 3 stitches of needle 1, and now we're going to knit 2 together and knit 1. I've got these 2 stitches and I'm just going to insert my needle into those 2 stitches as if they were 1 and wrap my needle around and pull out a stitch. Now those 2 stitches have become 1 stitch, and I'll drop that off the needle, give it a little tug, and that is my knit 2 together. Now we're going to do a knit 1. There we are. And that is the end of needle 1, okay? So now I'll turn my knitting around and we're gonna work needle 2. Needle 2 is really simple. We're just going to knit across all the stitches, no decreasing at all. So let's just speed through that. Now we're at the end of needle 2, perfect. And we'll turn our knitting over again. And this is gonna be needle 3. So needle 3, we're gonna start with a knit 1. Here we go, knit 1. And again, give a little tug there. And then we're going to do a SSK. I'm going to insert my right needle into the next stitch as if to knit and slip it off the needle. And I'll do the same to the second stitch. Insert into it as if to knit, slip it off. Then with our left needle, I'm going to go into these 2 stitches from the left to the right, just like that. And then I'm going to knit into those 2 stitches and push it off the needle. Now those 2 slip stitches have become 1, so that's a decreased stitch. And then we're just going to knit to the end of the needle. So that's all there is to this decrease round. And there's my last stitch on needle 3. Great, so that is the end of round 2. That would be our decrease round. So 2 stitches have been decreased. We did one right here on needle 1, and we did one right here on needle 3 just now, okay? So you can sort of see our sock taking shape now. You can see that this is the heel, this is where our heel turned, and this part where we are now decreasing is our gusset. So now I'm gonna take out my notepad so I can chart out these next few rounds. Okay, so our instructions say work rounds 1 to 2 a total of 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 times. And for me, I need to do this 8 times because I'm knitting an adult small, as I've mentioned so many times. So I'm gonna do, again, 2 columns because we're working rounds 1 and round 2. And in brackets, I'll just do like a minus sign to show that round 2 is a decrease round. Because I'm doing adult small, I'm just gonna write 8 times here just to remind myself. By the end of this repeat, I will have 40 stitches. You may have 28, 32, 36, 44, or 48 stitches. You'll notice that the instructions say work rounds 1 to 2 a total of 8 times. So we have actually just worked round 1 and round 2. So I'm actually going to just fill that in. I worked round 1 and I worked round 2. So now I need to work rounds 1 and 2 7 more times. And by the end of it, I should have 40 stitches. So let's do that. I'm going to go right back to round 1, which is just knitting all the stitches in the round. So we've just finished round 1 and I've marked it down, and now I'm going to work round 2, which is our decrease round. Needle 1, we're going to knit to the last 3 stitches. So here we're at 3 stitches before the end of needle 1, and I'm going to do my knit 2 together. Just knit these 2 stitches. Here we go, as if they were 1. There's our knit 2 together, and then knit 1. Perfect. That's our needle 1 done, and I'm going to move on to needle 2. Needle 2 is just knitting all the stitches, no decrease, no nothing, just an even knit across that needle. Now we're near the end of needle 2. Let's turn our knitting over and work needle 3. And needle 3 begins with a knit 1, and then we're going to do a slip, slip, knit. There we go, knit. And then just knit to the end of the round. And here's our last stitch of needle 3. Great. So now we've just completed round 2, and I'm going to grab my notebook and just mark off that we've done round 2. And I would just continue working rounds 1, round 2, round 1, round 2 until I have filled up this whole chart, and I've worked a total of 8 repeats for my size. So I'm going to go right back to round 1. So go ahead and work through rounds 1 and rounds 2 the number of times that you need for your size. So I've done 8 repeats of round 1 and round 2, and I should have 40 stitches for my size. So I'm going to count up my stitches real quick. 80, 20. Great. So I've got 20 here, 20 on these 2 needles, which is a total of 40 stitches, which is what I need for my size. So I just want to point out, this is the gusset, right? You can see where we decrease. There's this beautiful curve on both sides of the sock, and that's what those decreases have done. So just admire your sock and congratulate yourself. Give yourself a little treat, because the difficult part of knitting the sock is now complete. You've made the heel, you've turned the heel, you've knit the gusset, it's all smooth sailing from here. We're going to knit just the foot of the sock, and that can be however long you need it to be depending on the length of your foot. So let's talk about how to calculate how long to knit the sock for. For the foot of the sock, knit until the foot is 1.5, 1.7, or 2 inches less than the total length of the human foot. So for adult small, I'll be knitting 1.7 inches less than the foot length. So this sock is for my niece Anna, and I measured her foot earlier, and it's 22 centimeters or 8.66 inches. So 8.66 inches minus 1.7 is 6.96 inches. So that's the length that my sock needs to be before I decrease for the toe. And we are measuring from the heel. So for me, once my sock is 6.96 inches, then I can move on to the toe. So this is the point where you can throw on your favorite show, just periodically measure your sock from the heel to keep track of the length of your sock. I've had a great time knitting stockinette stitch, watching Love is Blind UK. Jasmine, your mom is wild. I've measured my sock and it's 6.9 inches from the heel, and now we're ready to decrease our toe. Now the toe decreases are quite similar to when you were knitting the gusset decreases. With the gusset, you were decreasing on needle 1 and needle 3, but now when we're knitting the toe, we're also going to decrease on needle 2 on both ends of it. So we've got decreases going here, 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 and here. So I'm going to start on needle 1, round 1. We're going to knit to the last 3 stitches of needle 1, very similar to our last gusset decrease round. Whoops. So here we're at the last 3 stitches, and I'm just going to knit 2 together. There we go, wrap it around, knit 2 together, and then knit 1. And that's our needle 1 sorted for round 1. Now we're gonna turn over and work needle 2 of round 1. Okay, needle 2, knit 1, and then we're going to do an SSK. So that's a slip, slip, knit. Perfect. And then we're going to knit to the last 3 stitches on needle 2. Now we're at the last 3 stitches of needle 2, and I'm going to do a knit 2 together. So here we go, just knit 2 together, beautiful, and then a knit 1, and that's needle 2 done. And now let's go over to needle 3. And needle 3 is very familiar as well. We're going to do a knit 1, and then we're going to do an SSK. So we're going to do a slip, slip, and then a, whoops, there we go, slip, slip, knit. Beautiful. And then we're just going to knit to the end of the needle. Beautiful. So now I've just worked my first decrease round, and we have decreased here, 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 and here. That's 4 stitches decreased. Okay, let's move on to round 2. Round 2 is super simple. We're just going to knit across all the needles, and that's it. So now I have finished round 2, just knitting all the stitches even for this round. So let's get out our notebook so we can chart out these instructions. Okay, so we're gonna knit rounds 1 to 2, a total of, for me, it would be 4 times. So again, I'm going to do 2 columns. 1 represents row 1, 1 represents row 2. Row 1 is the decrease row, so I've written that little minus there. So we're going to do rows 1 to 2, for my size, a total of 4 times. And I just did 1 repeat, right? So I'm going to mark off rows 1 and rows 2. And now I need to repeat rows 1 to 2 3 more times. So work your repeat of round 1 and 2, the number of times that you need, and then come back here and we'll work the next part together. I've just completed the toe decrease. Let's count up our stitches. I should have 24 stitches. 22 and 24, perfect. So I've got the stitches that I need, and you can kind of see that the toe is taking shape, right? It's got this beautiful rounded decrease here. So our instructions say that we are going to knit round 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2 more times. So for my size, I'm going to be knitting round 1, the decrease round, 2 more times to further decrease the toe. So go ahead and work the decrease round either 1 or 2 more times depending on your size. I've done 2 repeats of round 1, and now let's do a final stitch count. I need 16 stitches. You may need 12, 16, or 20. 14 and 16. Perfect. So now I know that I have decreased my toe correctly. How amazing is this sock? We are so close to being done. Oh my gosh. Let's consolidate our stitches and put them into the right formation. Let's knit across needle 1 and needle 2. This is the same instruction for all sizes. So here we go. This is needle 1. So we're going to just knit across needle 1. And then we are going to also knit across needle 2. Needle 2, this guy right here. And there we go, needle 2. So now our instructions say to slide all stitches on needle 1 and needle 3 onto one needle. So needle 1 and needle 3 are these 2 needles right here. So I'm going to slide all of these stitches onto one needle. I'm just going to use my right needle and I'm going to slide the stitches. Just grab them, bring them over. The transferring of stitches is complete. So all of your stitches should be evenly distributed across 2 needles. The working yarn should be coming from the back needle. So now we are ready to graft the toe closed. Now this is a slightly tricky technique, but just follow along. You can even watch me go through this once or twice first, just to kind of get a sense of how this grafting works. We are going to be using Kitchener stitch to make a really beautiful seamless join between the stitches on the front and the back of the sock. So what I'm going to do is cut out 15-inch strand of yarn, grab my tapestry needle, thread it through. I'm going to push my stitches kind of close to the tips of the needle. The back needle has the working yarn coming out of this first stitch here. So what we're going to do first is 2 setup stitches. So with my tapestry needle, I'm going to go into the first stitch on my needle up front as if to purl. Okay, so I'm going in this way. If I went in this way, that's going in as if to knit-wise. So we want to go in purl-wise, okay? So I'm going to go in purl-wise and just draw the yarn through. And then into the first stitch on my back needle, I'm going to go in knitwise. So I'm just kind of going in between the 2 knitting needles and just going into this first stitch on the back as if I were knitting and drawing it through. That was our 2 setup stitches. Now we're going to start popping the stitches off the needle. Now we're going to go into the first stitch on my front needle and I'm going to go in as if to knit, okay, just like this. And then I'm going to pop that whole stitch off. So knit off and then draw the yarn through, give it a little tug. And now I'm going to go into this first stitch on my front needle as if to purl-wise, okay, like this, and draw it through. So no stitches coming off, I'm just drawing my yarn through. Now we go to the stitch on the back. This guy right here, I'm going to go in purl-wise and just pop it off the needle, okay, and draw my yarn through, give it a little bit of a tug. And the first stitch on my back needle, I'm going to go in knitwise and draw the yarn through, just like that. Give it a little tug. Now we're back to the first stitch on the front needle. I'm going to go in knitwise and drop it off the needle. Draw the yarn through, and I'm going to go into that next stitch on the front needle purl-wise and draw it through. Okay, now I go to the back. First stitch on the back needle, I'm going to go in purl-wise, pop it off, purl off, and draw the yarn through. And then the next stitch on the back needle, I'm going to go in knitwise and draw it through. Okay, so knit on. Now we go back to the first stitch on our front needle. I'm going to go in knitwise, okay, as if to knit, and pop it off, knit off. Pull the yarn through. Now this first stitch on our front needle, I'm going to go purl-wise in, purl on. So we're keeping the yarn on the stitch. Now the stitch on the back needle, I'm going to go in purl-wise, purl-wise, and purl it off. Draw the yarn through. And then I'm going to go into the next stitch on my back needle and do a knit on. So I'm going in knitwise and leaving the yarn on, knit on. Now back to the front needle, I'm going to go knitwise, so knit off, drop the stitch off, pull the yarn through. Then I'm going to do a purl on. I'm going to go in purl-wise and leave the yarn on. Now to the back needle, I'm going to go purl off, draw the yarn through, and then knit on onto this next stitch on the back needle. Knit on. So I'm just going to continue working the rest of the stitches in the same manner. I'm going to go knit off on the front needle, purl on, then onto the back needle, purl off, draw the yarn through, and then knit onto the back needle, front needle, knit off, draw the yarn through, purl on the front needle, back needle, purl off, draw the yarn through, knit on, front needle, knit off. This is where it gets a little tricky because there's so little stitches left. Front needle, purl on to that last stitch, and on the back needle we're going to go purl off, draw the yarn through, knit onto that last stitch on the back needle. Now we've only got 2 stitches left. Onto the front needle we're going to go knit off. There we are, and I can just release this front needle, and on the last stitch on the back needle I'm going to go purl off, drop that needle off, draw the yarn through, and that is Kitchener stitch. Now let me just show you the toe. It looks beautifully seamed from one side up here and then down here. So I've got my tapestry needle here, and I'm going to push my tapestry needle into the inside of my sock, grab that needle from within the inside of my sock, pull the yarn through, give it a tight tug, and now the yarn is on the inside of my sock and it's nice and secure. At this point, let the recipient of the sock, it could be you, it could be someone else, see how it fits for them. If it fits and they love it, then guess what? You're gonna do this entire process all over again. You're gonna knit a second sock following the exact same instructions that you did for this sock. So if the sock fits, you might wonder, how am I gonna knit an identical sock? Well, you could always use a measuring tape or use your first sock as a guide. Count up the rounds from the stitch marker to the point where the toe decreases begin, then mark down the number of rounds, and when you work your second sock, knit the same number of rounds before you work the toe decreases. So let's finish up this sock by weaving in the ends. I've threaded up this loose tail end from my cast on. So I'm just gonna go into the other side of the rib and just kind of close that up here. That looks pretty good to me. I'm gonna turn over to the wrong side. What I'm gonna do is hide this strand of yarn in this column of knit stitches. So I'm gonna use my tapestry needle to grab the right leg of this knit stitch, and I'm going to go around again and grab that right leg of the next knit stitch, and then go and grab the right leg of this other knit stitch, just kind of going up the column of knit stitches here, grabbing the right leg, here we go, and the next right leg and the next right leg up here. I'm going to draw my tapestry needle through, and my little yarn tail is just hidden inside all of these right legs of this knit column. And when I look on the right side, it looks beautifully smooth up top. So let's snip off this yarn tail. Now I'm going to turn it inside out. So I've threaded up my tapestry needle. Because we're dealing with purl stitches, just go into purl bumps. Little purl bump here, and I'm going to go across into these purl bumps, up and then down, and I'm just kind of going up and down across these purl bumps until I feel like this is pretty secure. I'm gonna leave a little bit of a tail, and that's the tail of my toe woven into the sock. My sock is complete. Look how cute this looks. Pat yourself on the back, because this is a huge accomplishment. You just knit a sock all by yourself. For now, just admire this beautiful sock before you embark on knitting the second sock. Well done. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Davina from sheepandstitch.com. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe for more videos like this one, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.